this is again from my deck here. ARPU is an acronym that means average revenue per unit. It's also called ARPA, average revenue per account. It can also be average order value, etc. It's just like, what is the average customer worth to you versus what sort of CAC can you afford? If you have a super low customer value, right? So Square, for example, they were targeting small businesses. They don't make a ton of money off of each individual customer. They can do things like, B2C SEO. You can do, viral marketing, etc. You can do paid acquisition. If you have slightly higher average revenue per customer, you can do things like HubSpot does. They've got, I think, probably 30 or 40 people on the content team now writing blog articles. They spend money on PPC. They can do all of this stuff, inclusive of this. And then if you have a really high average revenue per customer, high average LTV, it opens up more options for you. You can do enterprise sales. You can buy commercials at the World Cup. It just determines what level of go-to-market motions you can afford. And this is an important thing for startups to figure out, is when you're looking at your phase 1, product market fit, and then phase 2, how much are people willing to pay and how often are they willing to pay for it? So that customer lifetime value bit. If your lifetime value is too low, it's going to restrict the sorts of things you can do and how quickly you can grow. So a lot of times before you start scaling, which is the third phase we're going to talk about in a minute, you need to solve for how do you either get a more valuable customer who's going to pay you more, or solve for that customer lifetime value. A lot of times in marketing, we look at this as a funnel, right? So we have the world of people who we could be interested in, then some people who end up talking to us, and some people who end up buying. When you're doing a startup, you actually want to reverse that. Flip the funnel. You start with the customer lifetime value and then back into what sort of go-to-market motions you can afford. So if your customer lifetime value is $1,200 and you want a ratio of 1 to 3, that's a whole separate class of how you choose that ratio, by the way. The short version is when you're trying to grow really fast, you want this ratio to be smaller because you're not worried about profitability. You're worried about taking over the market. But if that's your ratio, right, that means you can spend $400 to acquire a customer. $1,200, $300, $400. You get that. If you have a 10% lead to customer rate, so every lead that comes into your business, every free trial, every free account, whatever that is, turns into a customer, that means you can spend $40 cost of lead acquisition, or COLA. If you have a 5% visit to lead rate, that means you can spend $2 on your cost of visit acquisition. So you started with your customer lifetime value here, and then you can work your way back into what can we do. At a $2 cost per visit, you can't spend on AdWords if the cost per click is going to be $3, because your business model falls out of balance. And so the question for most go-to-market teams, you can either increase, again, this customer lifetime value, or you can optimize the marketing funnel. So if you think about the top of the funnel, you spent $1,000 salary, program spend, whatever, you got 500 website visits. That means you spent $2 to get a visitor. That's your cost of visit acquisition. You got 500 visits for $1,000. Let me just skip to the rest of this. If you've got a 5% visit to lead, right, that means that you can spend $20, 10% lead to customer, $200 cost of customer acquisition. If you instead spend $1,000 and get 1,000 website visits, maybe you got better targeting your PPC, maybe you invested in SEO, et cetera, that same ratio helps you get a more favorable cost of customer acquisition because you've optimized the top of the funnel. And let me skip to one thing here. What I want to show you is the same model. So the cost of visit acquisition at $2, you spend $1,000 and got 1,000 website visits. If instead of a 5% visit to lead, you have a 6% visit to lead. So say you invested in conversion rate optimization or retargeting, et cetera, you add live chat to your website, always a good idea. That reduces your cost of customer acquisition from $400 down to $333. So it's not always about how do you get cheaper traffic. A lot of people focus on how do we just grow more traffic to the website. Very often you'll find the leverage in your business model is further down the funnel. So optimizing how many leads turn into customers or optimizing how many visits turn into leads. That then you can either keep your cost of customer acquisition at $333, or you can say, I'm okay with having a $400 cost of customer acquisition because it fits my model. And then you can have a higher cost of visit acquisition. And instead of shooting for $2, you can now shoot for $2.50. So I'll walk you through a practical example of this. This is my friend, Dr. Evans. He's a dentist in Florida in the U.S. He is a specialist and he does surgery. The average surgery is $1,000 and he nets 30% of that. His lifetime value is only one time somebody comes, because if anybody ever comes back to him, it's usually because he's getting sued. He's a surgeon. They're not supposed to come back. But that's his lifetime value. His profit for him is $300. Because he's a specialist, he turns lots of customers, leads into customers. You don't come talk to him unless you're probably going to be relevant. So that means he can spend $100 to get a customer in the 1 to 3 sort of ratio here. He's a specialist, so the lead cost is $25. Visit to lead is very high, again, because he's sort of niche, so he can spend $5. And so Yelp was telling him, well, it'll cost you $3 a click for us to send you customers. And he can afford up to $5 a click. So as long as the traffic coming from Yelp converts at this same rate, it fits within his model. $3, 20% visit to lead is, $15, something like that. It's less than the model that he can afford. So that's the funnel. Now, the next thing I want you to do is, how do you take the funnel and overlay it on top of the buyer's journey? So the buyer's journey, we tend to think of this like nice, simple, linear process where people go from awareness to consideration to purchase. And it's sort of similar to the funnel, right? There are more people who are in the awareness phase than are in the consideration phase. There are more people in the consideration phase than are in the purchase phase. You can see this is like visit to lead, lead to customer. The thing about customers and decision making is it's not quite that simple. People don't go through this nice, smooth little funnel. And so your marketing activities have to reflect that. So this is a framework that I built while I was at HubSpot, along with the folks at eBay, where we tried to split the buyer's journey into the phases of the funnel. So at the very top, you have sort of the relevance phase, right? This is where you're blogging, you're doing PPC, et cetera. You're getting website visitors or store visitors if you're a retail establishment. And some turning into leads. They're expressing interest. You know something about them. Obviously, you're not done here because leads don't make us money. And this is where we come up with one of my favorite quotes in the history of business. So Jeff Bezos, obviously the founder of Amazon.com, when they first started adding negative reviews to the website, his investors sent him a letter and basically said, Jeff, we know you think this whole internet thing is going to be big and all, but you clearly don't understand how to run a business because you make money when you sell things. So why would you do anything that would discourage somebody from buying something? And Bezos' reply was, we don't make money when we sell things. We make money when we help customers make purchase decisions. You can see this, for example, if you've been on Amazon recently. They add things like Amazon's Choice. They let you rank by, or sort by the ratings, et cetera. They're trying to create these mechanisms that enable somebody to make a decision. And that decision-making process itself is not linear. What I like about this graph that we made with the folks at eBay, somebody goes from research to comparison to intent, but they can move back and forth, right? So I can be in the intent phase of getting ready to buy something, and then I discover something new. Like I find out about a new feature. One of the products I'm looking at says that it has SureSeal technology. I'm like, oh, I don't actually know what SureSeal technology is. Is that something I need to be waiting in deciding what to buy? And that may actually kick me back out into the comparison phase or the research phase of the buyer's journey. You see this a lot with abandoned cart nurturing. If somebody abandons their cart, a lot of marketers will just spam them with coupons, assuming they're in the intent phase, and the only thing that's required is for them to have a sense of urgency or a discount or something. That may not be the case. It may just be that they weren't quite ready. They didn't have enough information to make that decision. So while we model this as a funnel, as marketers and as startup folks, what I want you to think about is it's not your job to move somebody down this funnel. It's your job to identify what phase of the buyer's journey they're in and serve them the relevant experience. So if they're in the research phase, it's education based. It's blog articles, it's buyer's guides, etc. If they're in the comparison phase, it's things that help them make a decision, give them a framework for evaluating. You see this on a lot of startup websites. You'll see these like charts that show, the features we have versus the features everybody else has, and the nice little X's and check marks. Or if they're in the intent phase, sometimes they need incentives. Sometimes they just need a reminder in order to get to where that purchase is. This is the bottom of the funnel that most people stop at. Now, obviously, we as super sophisticated startup people know that somebody paying you once is not where the battle ends. We focus on the customer lifetime value. So do they purchase over and over and over again? And then beyond that, one of the metrics that we can use to predict if they're going to repurchase are things like customer satisfaction. But the customer satisfaction metrics serve another purpose as well. So this is what's called a Net Promoter Score survey. And it asks the question, how likely are you to recommend HubSpot to others? 0 to 10. 0 being, I hate everything about HubSpot. 10 being, I love HubSpot and I'm going to recommend HubSpot to everybody. This is a predictive metric of whether or not somebody's going to remain a user. That customer lifetime value, that retention chart, that cohort retention chart, you want to create these metrics that predict whether or not somebody's going to be retained. But this is also a growth metric. I actually, every time I get one of these surveys from a company, I always give them a 0 just to see if anything happens. And I did this on TripAdvisor maybe 5 years ago. They sent me one of these surveys and I gave them a 0. And then they sent me an email saying, awesome, please share your review on these 5 other platforms. And I'm like, oh, really? I just said, I'm super unhappy. I'm zero probability to recommend you. And you just sent me a bunch of links to make it easy for me to share my opinion with the world. Your touch points should be based on the customer's implicit or explicit data. Conversely, by the way, so like if they give you a 0, create a support ticket. Have somebody reach out to them and find out what happened. First of all, you might be able to win them back as a customer. You might be able to turn them into a promoter, but at the very least, you might be able to mitigate, the negative, reaction that they have. Conversely, if they give you a 10, they say I'm highly probable to share. Don't just say thank you for your response and then ignore them. Give them an opportunity to. T-Mobile does this to me all the time. They text me an NPS survey, and whether I give them a 0 or a 10, they take no action. If I give you a 10, you should send me a link to, Trust Radius or G2 Crowd or some way to review you, or alternatively, say, cool, click this button to invite your friends, enter these email addresses and send it to people. The companies that are really good at this sort of thing are the companies that get that retention that's over 100%. Like Slack I talked about earlier. Slack's retention was 147%. And it's because they have an experience that make people happy, and they're good at retaining. And they're good at capitalizing on getting you to invite other people. So people who are in this like 8, 9, 10 bucket, getting them to actually promote their product or service to other people. And the interesting thing that happens if you're good at that is every time you acquire a customer, it makes acquiring your next customer cheaper. And that's where you get exponential growth. And so that completes the buyer's journey here. If you can turn customers into customers who have lifetime